Hello, everyone. Today I have the pleasure to talk about a very important subject, which is the connection of the oral microbiome with the rest of the body and how they support each other for producing essential substances and molecules. In this case, we're going to talk more specifically about one in particular, which is nitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide, it's an essential molecule for human life. And we have two pathways mainly for that to be made. And it is completely connected to the health status of your oral and gut microbiome to be supported in the production in the best way possible. So today we're going to dive deeper into this subject, and we're going to understand in a complete sense how these two ecosystems are supporting each other for making this essential molecule for human life. Now, to begin with, we want to know what we're going to be learning specifically, and what we're going to be doing here today is, first, I will speak general terms about the oral microbiome so everyone has a good sense of what we're talking about in terms of this very important ecosystem in the body. Then we're going to talk about how it's connected to these essential pathways and how it's connected also to the rest of the body, which I believe is a critical understanding that is missed, unfortunately, in standard medicine in a major way. I mean, not completely, but very important way for connecting the dots in terms of systemic health. The oral microbiome, I mentioned this in a different lecture, is the second largest and most diverse microbiota after the gut, has more than 700 species of bacteria, and it hosts many different types of microorganisms, including bacteria, fungi, viruses, and protozoas. And it is exceptionally complex because in the mouth, you have all these different ecosystems with different types of nutrients and different types of pH and temperature and oxygen levels. So it is very complex in itself, and it's very diverse. So there has to be certain mechanisms to sustain the life of all these different microorganisms so they will remain stable. And we can have a certain degree of pattern of the composition that remains consistent over time. It will be incredibly complicated if these microbes are changing all the time, because the predictability and, of course, the consistency in the production of certain substances and keeping and maintaining the ecological conditions needed for these different areas of the mouth will be very, very compromised. So we need that stability, and that is coming actually from a critical standpoint in human physiology that led me actually to understand how the nitric oxide started being produced, but also many other things that are coming from the mouth microbiome ecosystem. So we know the oral microbiome is one of the most stable microbiotas we have in the body. And again, this was very complicated to understand at the beginning because we have this open cavity exposed to so many changes coming from the environment, and also these different foods and with different temperatures and different textures and different compositions. And so it is very exposed to a lot of things and still remains very stable, according to the research we have available. Actually, if you look at Spearman correlation, there's multiple niches inside the mouth that are very stable compared to other parts of the body, including the tongue dorsum, saliva, hard palate, throat, etc. So how we maintain this stability, even though we have all these exposures and all these elements coming in on a frequent basis? Well, it is because the stability comes with a sustainable and consistent nutrition. And that happens really everywhere in the body, and the mouth is not an exception for this. And that sustainable and consistent nutrition comes from something called the intercellular circuit. So it comes from the saliva, and also another fluid that is produced in the mouth, which is the clavicular fluid, which is something that comes out in between the gums and the teeth. And that's something that is critical for understanding periodontal disease and, of course, periodontal health. So these salivary and clavicular fluid nutrients are coming from this enterosalivary circulation. And this enterosalivary circulation, what it does is bringing nutrients from the gut back to the mouth after they are broken down and absorbed there. So in a very big sense, the nutrition of the mouth relies on the ability of the gut microbiome and the gut digestive organs to be sustained. So if we don't have good balance in the gut microbiome, and we don't have good balance and good functionality in our gut organs, it's very impossible that we're going to be able to provide nutrients to the mouth microbiome. Therefore, the symbiotic relationship what we have, it is critical, and also it states something pretty obvious, that we can't have a balanced oral microbiome without a balanced gut microbiome and a good digestive functionality. Now, because the oral microbiome, it's positioned as a gateway for most of the vital functions for human life, and is so connected to the rest of the body, it has a tremendous influence in many bodies' processes. And this is all about information. This is all about what we're bringing in from the environment that is being processed inside the mouth, and then we swallow. We're swallowing 140 billion microbes every day. So this is a very potent probiotic if you want to think about this swallowing microbes in that sense. And these microbes that are arriving into the gut, they will provide pieces of genes, information. And that is going to be read by your gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome, we know, has a very tight relationship with the immune system. So if you don't get proper management of the information in the mouth, what you're going to be passing to the gut, and therefore transported and translated to the immune system, is not going to be probably the proper amount of information you want to provide, or maybe not the right type of information you want to provide, and that can lead to abnormal functioning of the immune system, leading to chronic inflammatory conditions. So dysbiosis in the oral microbiome, it is clearly linked to a number of local and systemic diseases. Now, in terms of the nitric oxide, so we know that one of the things that is, and again, I mentioned this initially, one of the things that is made, at least partially, through the metabolic processes of the mouth microbiome, it is nitric oxide production. And nitric oxide, if it's low in the production, if it's low in the systemic levels, is implicated in pretty much every chronic disease that we know. It's a critical molecule. It's a signaling molecule, and it is critical for proper blood flow and proper oxygenation of the tissues. It's actually the third gas involved in the oxygen transportation, and we'll speak about this more in detail in a minute. But if we don't have nitric oxide, oxygen is not delivered to your body's tissues. So we need that in order to transport properly the oxygen to different parts of the body. Well, how critical is that? That's huge. So then we know that a healthy blood flow is foundation for wellness and healing. So how important is to keep the production of nitric oxide, and therefore how important is to keep the ecosystem related to the production of nitric oxide, in this case, the mouth microbiome. And discovery of nitric oxide and the functions, it was a very important event in the history of cardiovascular medicine, and actually one of the most important events in human health. And we're still researching and learning more about it, and how critical it is for sustaining human health, and how important it is to keep that proper production of nitric oxide over the years, So initially we're covered, but by a certain pathway that is not so dependent on our microbiome directly, but over the pass of time, we are more reliant on this other pathways that are also related to the microbiome. And that's why altering our mouth microbiome and our gut microbiome can profoundly negatively affect the production of nitric oxide. And if we see the patterns in the decline and the functionality of the mouth microbiome and the gut microbiome over the years, and then we see patterns on the dietary trends that are usually implicated if it's not a good diet and not a healthy diet in progression of multiple types of diseases. And also we start evaluating the lowering in the production of nitric oxide, we see that everything aligns. So today we have numbers that are not really exciting for us. 6 out of 10 Americans, they have a chronic disease. 4 in 10 Americans, they have 2 or more chronic diseases. And these chronic diseases are getting people in disability. So we have heart disease, cancer, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, strokes, chronic lung disease, Alzheimer's, depression, and the list keep going and going, that are disabling people in the United States for doing a normal life, to being productive, for enjoying, for thriving, and for being part of their communities in a normal way. That's terrible. Of course, besides the financial, mental, and emotional impact that all these diseases they have in the person and their family nucleus. Now, as I said before, nitric oxide is implicated in all these chronic diseases that I just mentioned. And so there's really an important correlation between the lowering in nitric oxide and the progression and occurrence of these type of chronic illnesses. So we're going to talk now why and how we're going to be getting more nitric oxide, why we need it, and how we're going to improve nitric oxide levels, since it's such an important molecule for human health. So I mentioned before that when we're young, we rely on a certain pathway for making nitric oxide, and that is the L-arginine pathway. So L-arginine plus oxygen can be converted by the activity of an enzyme or nitric oxide synthase into nitric oxide. And this is created in the endothelium of the blood vessels, and it is not typically related to dietary nitrates. So we can produce these on demand, and we can supply the nitric oxide and create all the biological effects we're looking for by this the presence of this molecule. Now, that is actually pretty efficient up to the age of 40, averagely. After that, it starts declining pretty significantly. And actually, at the age of 40, we hit a lowering in the production that averagely, for the average American, is 50% less than what we should be making on a standard basis. But we have another pathway for making nitric oxide, and that is the nitrate reduction. So dietary nitrates, they can be converted through the oral microbiome activity into nitrites. So they get reduced into nitrites, and those nitrites, when we swallow them, they can get reduced furthermore into nitric oxide. But as I said before, this is related first to the conversion of nitrates into nitrites, and that is mediated by the oral microbiome. Now, what we are doing, unfortunately, on the traditional basis is affecting the oral microbiome to the point that we're diminishing the efficiency of this pathway and the conversion of nitrates into nitrites, so they can get further reduced into nitric oxide. And we need to really empower this pathway, because again, we know that the other pathway start declining by various reasons after the age of 40, averagely. The women, they stay a little bit better on that pathway for a longer time, but still declines over the course of aging. And definitely we need to empower this pathway, the other pathway, much more eventually at some point of their lives. And why we're really focused on the nitric oxide production from a clinical perspective, because it's implied in so many aspects of health. As I mentioned before, is preventive for an improvement for all these clinical conditions, but also supports gut healing, supports sexual function in men and women. It's an effect in lowering inflammation, protects the bones. It has neuroprotective activity, supports balance, mood, and anxiety levels. It's also assisting the immune system in killing pathogens. It's protective for the skin. It's helping maintain a hormonal balance, supports a healthy blood pressure, which is huge. Your arteries also, they can stay more young and flexible with the presence of nitric oxide, and the arterial plaques are also prevented by good levels of nitric oxide. We can reduce the formation of blood clots, huge in many diseases and alteration of their circulatory system, and it can also help with the healthy cholesterol levels, reduces the risk of heart attack, supports blood sugar and insulin regulation, and overall improves physical stamina and athletic performance. So those things by themselves are incredibly important as and in concern of human health. And there's way more things that I can mention, but I think those things already are enough to understand the critical role that nitric oxide provides for human health. And what happens if you have low nitric oxide? Well, there's some signs and symptoms that you can evaluate. So people who are suffering from low stamina, for GI issues, muscle pain, pale skin, cold fingers, poor circulation, fingers and toes, numbness, chest pain, swelling, bulging veins, things typically appearing over the aging process. If you're using NSAIDs, if you have erectile dysfunction, if there's a female sexual dysfunction, if there's irregular hormones and imbalances in the endocrine system, if there are symptoms of peripheral neuropathy, if there's any type of disease related to cognitive and mental health, if your immune system is not really working properly and you're getting pretty sick frequently, those things are critical signs that there might be, at least in a partial form, a low nitric oxide level in the body and needs to be upregulated. Now, again, this is incredibly important for all the body tissues, and all the cell functions are also regulated to a certain extent by the presence of nitric oxide, including all the neurotransmission in the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, platelet activation, cytokine activation, intracellular signaling, the healing of wounds and angiogenesis, the skeletal muscle signaling, extracellularly speaking, the oxidative stress reduction, so we can keep that oxidative stress coped in the right way, and vascular homeostasis and vasodilation. All these things are related to nitric oxide. So from a cellular standpoint, we have a tremendous positive impact when we have proper management in the production of nitric oxide. So it is critical for every single aspect of maintaining overall health. And we can utilize the tools we have available today for improving nitric oxide levels and therefore improving the outcome, the progression, or the appearance of these chronic illnesses. Going back to the mouth aspect, the nitric oxide conversion after, again, the age of 40 especially, relies especially in your mouth. And the mouth microbiome is critical for the reduction process of nitrates into nitrites. And the oral microbes are relying on your terrain, meaning that you can only have some healthy microbes as long as you have a healthy terrain for your microbes to live in. And how many interventions we're doing on a daily basis, not speaking about when you go to the dentist and you get something done in the mouth. I'm talking about every single day of your life that you can be potentially toothbrushing with fluoride containing or antimicrobial or detergent based toothpaste, or you can be using an antimicrobial mouthwash. And that, again, along with other issues like mouth breathing, grinding of your teeth, and if you have also heavy metals in your mouth, or you have BPA containing fillings in your mouth, or you have galvanic currents because you have different types of metals in your mouth, all those things are going to create an alteration in the terrain, and then the microbes that are living in the mouth are going to get affected. And this is going to be, unfortunately, chronic. It's going to be on a long-term basis. So we know that if, for example, we use antiseptics in the mouth, that will directly affect the production of nitric oxide. And then we see issues on cardiovascular disease occurrence because we're lowering the nitric oxide production from the mouth. So when we know that the intersalivary pathway is incredibly important for keeping up the production of nitric oxide from the oral cavity, and therefore also the gut microbiome plays a huge role in this part of the production of nitric oxide. We know that mouthwashes, when we use them on a frequent basis, they can increase the risk of cardiometabolic disease in a significant way. And we have research about it, and there's even some reports of increased mortality when patients they have already a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. They are using a certain type of antiseptic mouthwash, and of course that is related to affecting the production of nitric oxide from the oral cavity. So, and the other thing about the oral microbiome is that it's incredibly adaptable for what you're putting in your mouth. So if you're bringing the good stuff, your mouth microbiome will start thriving and will produce more effectively things are needed. And in case of the nitric oxide production, this is made initially by dietary nitrates. So we know that when you put your dietary nitrates in your mouth, not only you're going to be providing the cookie dough for making nitric oxide, but also they work as a prebiotic. So they enhance the growth rate of the bacteria related to the production of nitric oxide. So not only sustains the production of nitric oxide, but also rebalances the mouth microbiome to become more efficient in the production of nitric oxide. So again, when we eat, we're supposed to be chewing our foods because that allows enough time of your foods to be in contact with the mouth microbiome to be able to grab all these prebiotic foods to increase the growth rate of certain bacteria that are related to certain metabolic pathways, and in this case, particularly about the nitric oxide production. We have plenty of evidence that several commensal oral bacteria are able to reduce nitrates into nitrites, and we have the groups identified, and we know they get benefit by exposure to these dietary nitrates on a frequent basis. So that's one way we can actually support our oral microbiome by providing and keeping in the mouth for a certain amount of time those dietary nitrates. So when you swallow things, when you drink smoothies or juices, I'm not saying those are bad for you, but definitely you're bypassing a very important aspect of your nutrition and a very important aspect of the maintenance of a balanced oral microbiome. Now, when we supplement with nitrates, we can make these microbiome changes in the direction of improving the efficiency on the nitric oxide bioavailability. And of course, we see all the positive outcomes of doing so. So we have very important connections between supporting, supplementing, or increasing the dietary intake of nitrates and exposing those oral microbes to those nitrates and the improvement of the things that are related to a good amount of production of nitric oxide in the body. Now, the pathway of this nitrate to become nitric oxide, it's pretty simple, but still it's not a short pathway. So when we eat foods containing nitrates, we swallow them, we chew them and we swallow them, and this is passed to your stomach and your intestines. And then nitrate, they're almost entirely absorbed in the small intestine. And then you have an increase in the plasmatic concentration of nitrates. 60% averagely of the nitrates are excreted in the urine, but the other remaining part is going to go back to the salivary glands. They're going to get bioaccumulated there, and they're going to be flushed into your mouth cavity. And when that happens, those oral microbes related to nitric oxide production, they're going to reduce these nitrates and they will become nitrites. And now you're swallowing, again, not nitrates, but nitrites, and then in the stomach, they get reduced again to produce nitric oxide. And it's another, of course, other byproducts at the same time. And that is where this nitric oxide gets involved and gets delivered to the rest of the tissues. Some other nitrates also, they will enter the systemic circulation. They can also be reduced to nitric oxide using certain specific enzymes. But the main part of the production of nitric oxide comes from the reduction of these nitrates into nitrites mediated by the oral microbiome. And also, what I just mentioned implies that it's very important not only to chew your foods, but to have very good efficiency in the production of stomach acid. And there's a big portion of the population which are using either PPIs or antacids on a frequent basis. And that affects directly the efficiency in the production of your nitric oxide, even though you might be getting dietary nitrates in good amounts. And that's something we need to consider. Now, some people, sometimes they have certain groups of microbes that are not so balanced. And when we expose those microbes to nitrates, instead of producing or going through the nitric oxide production pathway, there's going to be an alternative pathway that will be producing ammonium instead, which is highly inflammatory. And the terminating factor between producing nitric oxide or ammonium from your oral microbes is dictated by the terrain conditions initially. So, of course, preventing your mouth from getting or avoiding these materials that are not compatible with oral health, avoiding these chemicals that we can find in so many oral health products like toothpaste and mouthwashes, and also keeping a good diet and a good breathing pattern will dictate a better composition of your oral microbiome and preventing this pathway to go in the ammonium production instead of the nitric oxide production. Also, dietary nitrates will improve the growth rate of the bacteria related to the production of nitric oxide, diminishing the ones that are more related to the pathway of ammonium. So that's something to consider. We need to keep a good balance of the oral microbes. This is just not going to happen only because you're putting nitrates in the mouth. This is a comprehensive pathway that has to be supported in each step. So all the things we're learning today and all the things you probably knew before about biological dentistry, safe procedures in the mouth, and avoidance of chemicals in the oral hygiene products, these are critical for keeping all these things checked and that you will sustain the production of nitric oxide in the right direction and preventing other things to be produced that are not so good for us. So if we have an healthy oral microbiome, then we're going to be supporting heart health, hormonal health, gut health, cognitive performance, sexual function, and many other things. So your mouth microbiome now becomes a very important piece of your body for keeping yourself healthy. And over the years as a dentist, this was not really the common narrative. I know dentists, they have been relegated to secondary place in terms of human health and medicine. And apparently the common acknowledgement of the mouth in terms of the relationship with the rest of the body is that it's not really connected. This is something separately, and it doesn't get involved in other physiological processes. And the reality cannot be more farther from these statements. Reality is that the mouth is incredibly connected to the rest of the body. Now, in terms of the specific aspects of how important this is, the nitric oxide production plays a huge role in the development of innate immune responses because, first of all, it's essentially toxic for viruses, bacteria, and fungi and other pathogens. Nitric oxide can affect the growth rate of certain microbes, but also it can regulate the activity of the immune cells and inflammatory cells. And that includes a variety of them, including macrophages and T lymphocytes and antigen-presenting cells, mast cells, neutrophils, NK. So we have all these immune cells are regulated by the activity of nitric oxide. So the immune system relies on the presence of nitric oxide to function properly. Now, also what I mentioned initially in terms of the oxygen supply, which is critical for immune health, but also for many other things, because it's the primary nutrition that we need in our body. The primary nutrient is oxygen by far, and oxygen is delivered to the tissues with the mediation of presence of nitric oxide. If we don't have nitric oxide, then the oxygen that is carried by hemoglobin is not delivered into the tissues. So the whole cycle about oxygenation of the body is really not a 2-gas process, but a 3-gas process. It's CO2, O2, and nitric oxide. So another very important role of nitric oxide in the body. And as I mentioned before, the endothelial production of nitric oxide declines with age. And so the L-arginine pathway becomes less and less efficient. And also, if we try to support that directly, it is such a complex pathway that it's very unlikely we're going to be able to cover all the steps in order to support that pathway to stay more efficient for a longer period of time. So supplementing with L-arginine or L-citrulline or other types of supplements doesn't really work because there's an enzymatic impairment that doesn't allow the conversion of L-arginine into nitric oxide, and therefore, even though we can put all the L-arginine in the world, we're not going to be able to sustain that pathway for longer. And that's when this nutritional pathway of the conversion of nitric oxide from dietary nitrates becomes so important. And so anyone that really it's above the age of 40 or has gut issues or has inflammatory conditions or high blood pressure or any other type of cardiovascular issue or any metabolic or immune type of dysregulation or endocrine related issues like menopausal or perimenopausal changes or sexual dysfunction, fertility, etc. And athletes and everyone who wants to keep a metabolic performance in optimal levels, they will benefit from supporting nitric oxide levels. Now, also the nitric oxide can influence the composition and the functions of the microbiome, and therefore the gut microbiome, it gets benefit to a certain extent of the presence in normal amounts of nitric oxide. So when you try to fix your gut, if you're deficient in your nitric oxide levels, you have another issue that needs to be addressed, or you're not going to be very successful in your gut balancing protocol. So it is very important for, again, all these aspects and preventing things to go also in the wrong way. So for example, when we have too much inflammation, it can prevent macrophages and mast cells and neutrophils to produce too much cytokines release and too much overflow of certain immune cells to certain sites which can create acute and chronic both inflammatory conditions, and also reduces superoxide radicals, which can counteract higher levels of oxidative stress. So it has a hormetic effect, not only produces things or stimulates pathways, but also blocks things that are not supposed to be produced in larger amounts. So it is very important for maintaining homeostasis. Now, like I said before, you can't fully heal the gut if you don't have adequate levels of nitric oxide. It is not possible. It's needed. And actually, in research available regarding the role of nitric oxide in the gut, we know that the normal amounts of gut nitric oxide present around the gut lining stabilizes the tight junctions and improves the functionality of the epithelial cells of the colonocytes that are forming our gut lining. But if we have the presence of antibiotics, which we know they're highly disruptive for the gut lining, we know that those will affect also the molecules, the tight junctions, the occludin and claudin 5. There's going to be leakiness of the gut, and there's going to be also an increased production of molecules that are pro-inflammatory. Now, when we have good levels of nitrates and good amount of production of nitric oxide, even with the presence of the usage of antibiotics, we can maintain the tight junctions closed, prevent leaky gut, and further hyperactivation of the immune system leading to inflammatory conditions in the gut. So we know that nitric oxide has a protective role for keeping the gut lining and the tight junctions integrity, and therefore preventing inflammatory conditions related to the exposure of certain damaging molecules, in this case, antibiotics. Also, the nitric oxide regulates the acetylcholine pathway, which is also related to GI inflammation, and is all related also to the proper stimulation of the vagus nerve. So in a way, works as a neurotransmitter that influences the vagal tone and also reduces the inflammation that is dictated or related to the endocrine system and to the acetylcholine modulation. So it is a very important element for maintaining homeostasis in the gut. Macrophages also, they can express something called iNOS, incidental nitric oxide synthase, and this is something that can be activated by the presence of certain dysbiotic conditions, and nitric oxide can actually support the activation of this pathway and reducing the hyperactivation and increased release of cytokines, so maintaining homeostasis even with the proper response of the immune system regarding a certain agent that can be detrimental or pathogenic. But we don't go further, creating overactivation and damage, especially tissue damage, by activating our immune system. Now, unfortunately, coming from the mouth microbiome aspect of the nitric oxide production, most of us, we were trained that oral health habits was pretty much wiping off all the microbes in the mouth. And this is coming from the germ theory. And we know that's not true. Now, we're acknowledging this on the gut aspect of our microbiome. And we know now that antimicrobials, antibiotics are not really the best thing for our microbes there, but still we don't incorporate these concepts from the mouth perspective. And this is why even antibacterial herbal products can be detrimental for the oral microbiome. And I don't really endorse the overusage of essential oils and other botanical or organic derived antiseptics or antimicrobials, because they can be as potent as synthetic pharmaceutical forms of antimicrobials. So, not something I will endorse to be used on a long-term basis, and hopefully not even in a short-term basis, if it's possible. That we need to know now how we're going to build back our nitric oxide production knowing that there's so many things that are affecting the nitric oxide production coming from the dietary nitrate reduction pathway. So first of all, we need to build our nitrate pathway. And for that, basically, first of all, diet, increasing the consumption of nitrate-rich foods that will provide dietary nitrates that will support this pathway. But also we know that there's a certain deficiency in the amount of nitrates that we can find in our foods daily. And nowadays, because of these deficiencies, not only nitrates, but many other nutrients that are not found in certain density in foods as it was probably 100 years ago or 50 years ago, there's a need for supplementation. So I'm always recommending that at least 300 to 400 milligrams of nitrates are necessary to start seeing clinical changes in the blood pressure and other aspects that are of the body functions that are related to normal levels of nitric oxide production, especially based on the dietary nitrate conversion to nitric oxide. Now, lifestyle is critical. We know that physical activity is critical for producing nitric oxide in normal amounts. Also, your sleep quality, your levels of stress, things that you can be doing as a recreational habit, like smoking or vaping, should be stopped if you want to improve your nitric oxide production. Your oral hygiene is important, but in a conscious way, meaning that we need to brush our teeth, yes. We need to clean our tongue, of course, yes. We need to clean our interproximal spaces, for sure. But that doesn't need or require any detergent or any antimicrobial substance. We can do that mechanically, like we did for hundreds and hundreds of years. So these cosmetic products are not really necessary for keeping an oral hygiene in a normal way. Actually, research done that is comparing the usage of toothpaste in the toothbrushing and the toothbrushing alone, and the outcome is that there's absolutely no difference. So you are adding something that can be not beneficial for you, and on the other side, you're not getting any additional benefits by using that. So for me, it doesn't really make sense. If you're using a natural toothpaste, maybe it could be a good thing. But at least it will not be a damaging element. But the reality is that if you want to use something for a very specific reason, you can use it for a certain amount of time, like say, for example, hydroxyapatite, because you have something maybe going on in terms of loss of mineralization, and I will understand that. But on a long-term basis, I don't think nothing is needed in terms of oral hygiene except for your toothbrushing technique. Light therapy is another really good way for improving nitric oxide levels. We know red light therapy actually is incredibly potent for boosting your nitric oxide levels. So I definitely recommend that as an additional therapy when you have significant deficiencies in your levels of nitric oxide. Now, how we know that we have low levels of nitric oxide, besides the clinical symptoms I just mentioned? Well, you can test. There's some rapid salivary nitrate test that you can put your saliva on the tip of those strips, and then you can measure by a color code how much nitrites you're getting from the nitrate conversion from your oral microbiome pathway. So this is really a good indicator if you want to know that your oral microbiome is able to convert nitrates into nitrites, and therefore another probably good indicator of oral dysbiosis. So this is something that should be standardly applied in dental practices. You can get them online, and you can use them on a frequent basis and track your progress in terms of improving the conversion of nitrates into nitrites. And also, of course, as a consequence, knowing how much nitrates you're recirculating to your mouth to become available and converted into nitrites. So the other good thing about the foods is that they can provide probiotics and postbiotics and other things that can be balancing for the oral microbiome and the gut microbiome. So I'm always recommending probiotic foods, prebiotic foods as much as possible, and not overconsumption, but a conscious consumption. And mostly I'm always encouraging consistency in the consumption rather than huge amounts. Some people, they can tolerate only tiny bit of sauerkraut, for example, or kimchi, and it's fine. As long as they do that consistently, they will still feed their microbiome pretty well. And so there's other things like, for example, food rich in polyphenols are also amazingly beneficial for the gut and oral microbiome. So we have a very good amount of foods available and easily found in grocery stores that they can be beneficial for balancing your microbiome in the mouth and the gut. And again, the oral hygiene, avoidance of antimicrobials and fluoride and antiseptics in general, for me, it's critical. Coconut oil pulling in general, it's not a beneficial therapy or a strategy for the oral microbiome. It can be used with consciousness if there's some significant event going on that requires some usage of antimicrobials, but it has to be done on a short-term basis. Again, long-term basis derives into imbalances and depletion of the richness of the oral microbiome, leading to a lowering in the ability for producing all these essential molecules for human health. And again, boosting. So if you test and you see that you can make enough nitrites out of the nitrate conversion, and you are testing for those and you see there's nothing really showing up in the color bands, and you're in the light side of the color bands, so it's showing that you're low or depleted, well, start supplementing. Take a supplement. Improve your diet and every other aspect in terms of boosting the production of nitric oxides through the conversion of nitrates into nitrites. But also, you can get a good supplement to add more nitrates to match the nutritional levels we need of those nitrates in an optimal level for producing nitric oxide also in optimal amounts. So this is, for me, critical. And I think, just to close this topic, is that the management right now of the healthy nitric oxide levels, it is a critical piece of the puzzle for human health. Dentists, they should incorporate this type of analysis on a standard basis because they have the best access to this cavity, and with their clinical knowledge, they can empower people to know more about this. But also you as a consumer, everyone that's listening to this, as a consumer, knowing this, you know that there's something to be done and something to be avoided for improving your nitric oxide production. So now, not only you can be very proactive in the things that you can incorporate on a daily basis, but also you can avoid things that can be detrimental for the production of nitric oxide in healthy levels. Because at the end of the day, everything you're doing in boosting your nitric oxide levels will make everything else in your body better. So hopefully this gives you a lot of good takeaways, and that you can empower your life decisions to improve your nitric oxide levels, also to maintain a balanced ecosystem for your mouth microbiome, being more proactive in terms of the decision making of any type of intervention that you might need to get in your mouth, and understanding how important is the symbiotic relationship between the mouth microbiome and the gut microbiome to improve the overall human health. And I think with that, I will finish this lecture, and hopefully this is something that will be helpful for everyone. Again, a pleasure being with you, and hopefully I will see you again with another important topic soon. Have a great day.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.